Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. Today, we're honored to have France Q. Hoang on the show, Army Ranger, former Associate White House Counsel, and Special Assistant to the President, Board of Advisors for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and No One Left Behind, Distinguished Visiting Lecturer at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and co-founder and CEO of BoodleBox, a rising AI-powered platform. France's journey began in 1973 in Saigon, and as the city fell in 1975, he and his family were airlifted out and settled in the Pacific Northwest. It's that escape that became the catalyst for his life, a life of service, leadership, and innovation. France graduated in the top 1% of his class at West Point. He served as an Army Ranger and in Special Forces in Afghanistan, and then he pivoted to law, Georgetown, White House Counsel, and Special Assistant to the President, before returning to service and his career in tech. In this episode, we'll explore the significance of the Vietnam War Memorial as a living testament to sacrifice and new beginnings. And if you're curious about leadership, legacy, and how technology and memory intersect, stay tuned because this episode is for you. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Story Behind the Stone, a podcast where we talk service, sacrifice, and story. Today, I'm joined by our guest, France Hoang with BoodleBox AI. France, I don't know how to do a short introduction for you. Your life has so many chapters, so I might throw the microphone to you to give folks an update on who you are and what's keeping you busy, and then maybe we can get into a little bit about kind of how, in the early days of your life story, you had some substantial change, navigated successfully, and got to where you are today.
Yes, thanks, Matt. First off, it's just great to be here. I really enjoyed meeting you, hearing about the inspiration behind Story Behind the Stone. I am a storyteller at heart. I love and believe in the power of storytelling. I've had a fortunate life. I often tell people, try to live your life in a way so you have a lot of hold my beer moments. That's another way of saying live a life where you have a lot of stories, right? And I've been a lot of different things. I've been a lawyer. I've been a soldier. I've been an entrepreneur. But my first role in life, one of my earliest roles, was a refugee. My family originally came from Vietnam, and that was 50 years ago to the day last week.
I was really touched to hear about how you touched down in small town USA. What were your first days like? I know that you were very young, but maybe you've heard about it from your parents. How was that?
Yeah, so just to bring everyone up to speed, I was born in Saigon, Vietnam in 1973. My family was part of the airlift at the end of the Vietnam War, so April 23rd, 1975. That's 50 years ago last week. America did an amazing thing. 130,000 Vietnamese allies airlifted in a matter of weeks from Saigon, most touched down into Guam, and then from there headed to one of 4 resettlement centers in the United States. My family happened to go to Camp Pendleton, a Marine Corps base in California. And the first few days and weeks were uncertain. It's a new country, it's new life. And that's where, while America did a great thing, that's at the point where Americans started doing great things. Thousands, tens of thousands of Americans stood up and helped, these new arrivals to America's shores. In my case, it was really interesting. Governor Brown of California famously said at the time he did not want any Vietnamese refugees to stay in California. Governor Evans of Washington State heard these comments and wondered, what is the hubbub about? So he sent his aide, a man named Ralph Monroe, to travel to Camp Pendleton, who reported back, look, I see tens of thousands of men and women and little children playing, and they're ready to start a new life. And so Governor Evans had Ralph deliver a message. And the message was, Washington State wants you. You are welcome in Washington State. And so myself and thousands of other Vietnamese heard that and came to Washington. And we arrived and stayed first at a Washington Army National Guard armory, and then was taken in by a sponsor family, the Petersons, outside of Olympia, Washington. And they helped us get on our feet. And they did the best thing possible for a new arrival in the United States. They didn't take us in for very long. We stayed with them for a week, and they said, you need to go find a job. You need to go find a house. You need to get integrated and learn what it is like to live in America and to be an American. And that's what my family did.
Do you still keep in touch with the Peterson family?
Yes, they are still
Yeah.
alive. They live
Yeah.
in Washington State. What's interesting, Matt, is they had children almost the exact same age as me and my younger sister
Oh,
were at the same time. So I have this wonderful picture of me and my family and the Petersons and their family and all the kids together.
talking about all of your chapters, you went to West Point. You served at the White House. What led you down that path to have so much success at those institutions?
So first, I couldn't have had any of that success if I didn't have the opportunity for success.
Mhm.
And so I am, well, maybe painfully aware of how fortunate I am. And there's an alternate universe somewhere where little baby France did not come out of Vietnam,
Right.
and my parents would have probably ended up being, at best, put in re-education camps, at worst killed. And
Yeah.
that France is living a very different life than this
Wow.
France, right? Because this France got the chance to come to America to get an education, to get all the opportunities that being an American provides. Growing up, I learned about my family's history, Matt, and I came to appreciate the opportunities I had. And I felt that I had a debt that needed to be repaid. I felt this sense of obligation to the veterans who served in Vietnam, to the military that rescued me, and to this country for those opportunities. And that's what inspired me to a lifetime of service, starting with serving in the military. I felt that I owed a debt to the military for rescuing me and my family. And so that's what inspired me to apply and get an appointment to West Point. And from then, right, obviously having the amazing opportunity to serve in uniform, lead America's sons and daughters, and always in the back of my mind thinking I am walking in the same footsteps of the men and women who came before me and who served me. And so to be able to
Right.
have the chance to serve others like you were served is an incredibly powerful and special thing.
You served as a peacekeeper in Bosnia, is that right?
I did, yeah. When I was a platoon leader as a second lieutenant stationed in Germany with the 95th Military Police Battalion, in 1996, I had an opportunity to deploy what was then a platoon and then later lead a company minus and a detachment as a peacekeeper in the second wave into former Yugoslavia.
What do you recall of those days? Like, do you remember the first day that you touched down in Bosnia?
The first day, so interestingly, I didn't land in Bosnia. I drove from Germany to Hungary. I literally self-deployed my platoon. We loaded up our Humvees and went on this epic multiple day road trip to Hungary, and then eventually drove across the border into Croatia and eventually drove south to the Croatian Serbian border, Bosnian border. And yes, I remember those days well. It was my first time, Matt, ever experiencing what it was like to be in a country where there wasn't the rule of law, where might made right.
Right.
And, I remember seeing pictures of Vietnam, seeing those kind of chaotic, what wartime looked like. And that was my first time seeing it in person, but not my last.
How has your perspective on the conflict changed since you served?
I've come to appreciate all sides of the equation a little better, right? I've come to appreciate, later on, I had this amazing opportunity to recommission as an Army officer, serve in Afghanistan with Army Special Forces, even though I'm not a Green Beret. Between Bosnia and that experience, I had a chance to see first what it means to serve, right? And to lead soldiers in wartime and in peacekeeping. And that gave me a greater appreciation, even more great appreciation, right, for the service and sacrifice of the people in Vietnam, particularly because they were not celebrated for that service the way we were, right? I mean, when I came back from both Bosnia and from Afghanistan, I was met with a resounding chorus of thank you for your service. And that was the opposite of what the Vietnam veterans experienced when they came home. Second, I came to appreciate what a sacrifice the Allies made. So here's an interesting contrast. Of all the things that we ask our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines to do, the one thing we don't ask is for them to put their family in harm's way. Yet when a Vietnamese soldier decided to fight, or when an Afghan soldier decided to ally with the United States, they were not just putting themselves in danger, they were putting their family at risk. And that was really driven home to me, seeing the impact that war had on civilians and on families in both Bosnia and Vietnam. And then, seeing I was the beneficiary of the generosity of Americans when I came out of Saigon. I got to see and participate firsthand as an American, right, during the evacuation and fall of Kabul, when I saw tens of thousands of Americans stand up and say, I want to help, and try to help our Afghan allies get out. And that was a very full circle moment for me, Matt.
In that period of time with the evacuation, what were you feeling in those moments? Like, it must have been very emotional, and you saw a lot of parallels with your own family's experience.
It's one thing to know in your mind, right? Like, gosh, this is a terrible situation, having to upend your life, and I lived it, but I lived it as a child. I started all over again. It's really my parents who bore the brunt of having to start all over again. Right. And that was not the case of Afghanistan, because in that case, I was seeing it firsthand.
Yeah.
And participating in it firsthand, and having, seeing the desperation of families and I wasn't the only one, Matt, but getting signal or text messages in the middle of the night from a child saying, leaving a voice message saying, can you help? My father, served with you. Can you help me get my family, right? We need your help. Having to make terrible decisions, like which family gets prioritized on a chance to get out of Afghanistan versus another family. And just seeing the utter desperation of people who were paying the price for standing by America.
You helped with kind of the initial evacuations, and then were you involved as well in a private charter after as well?
The evacuation out of Kabul pretty much lasted the last 2-3 weeks of August of 2021, and at the very end of August, Kabul International Airport, HKIA, Hamid Karzai International Airport, closed its doors forever. And that had been, up to that point, the only way to get out of, really the only meaningful way to get out of Afghanistan. Some people were going across the borders, but that was the way out. When the airport closed, I found myself in a situation with a number of other volunteers where we had several hundred Afghans that we were working with that did not get into the airport and did not want to go back to their homes. They still wanted to get out. And so we ended up, through a kind of bizarre twist of fate, responsible for these hundreds of Afghans that wanted to get out. And we ended up taking them to a different city, Mazar-e-Sharif, which is sort of like the Casablanca of Afghanistan, a little bit more free-spirited, and spending several weeks hiding them, protecting them, feeding them, keeping them safe, and trying to secure and coordinate, pay for, arrange the logistics to get a flight out of Afghanistan. And in mid-September, we were successful in organizing the very first private charter flight out of Afghanistan after the U.S. ended its military and diplomatic presence. And on that plane, there were 380 passengers, 94 families, 152 children. And I'm happy to say all of them are now in the United States, starting new lives. Probably, one of the most terrifying and terrible moments and things I'd ever been involved in, but obviously one of the most gratifying and impactful things I've ever been involved in as well. And not the least of which reasoning was, each of those families, once upon a time, my family was one of them, coming on a plane to America.
Unbelievable. When does the book come out? It's an absolutely jaw-dropping story. Are there any family stories that you recall from that period in particular? You don't have to name names. Is there anyone's story that stuck out to you?
I would encourage anybody who meets a Vietnam veteran or a Vietnamese refugee or an Afghan refugee or an Afghan veteran, ask them to tell you a story. Like, ask them to tell you their story or a story they know, because there's so many stories out there. I'll tell you the story. There's a family. There was a soldier who I worked with closely in Afghanistan. I stayed in touch with. He was the reason I kind of got involved again with the evacuation in the first place. He was the one who needed the most help. And he was also the one I tried like 10 times to get out of Afghanistan, and just bad luck.
Wow.
He would like just the doors would be closed, the bus would leave, the gate wouldn't open, and it was him and his wife and 8 kids. And eventually, they did get out. They were on that plane that I described to you in the mid-September, and they ended up settling in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I visited them. I visited them about a month ago and got to see this family, right? And see these, this mother and the father, and there were 8 children. Several of them had graduated from college now, and I spoke to them. One of them was, driving a truck across the Midwest, and another, and he was thanking me and telling me all about his new life in America. But what really touched me was I have a picture of the family on the plane, and the father is sitting next to the youngest daughter, and she has this look in her face that is both hopeful and terrified at the same time, right? Just what is going to happen to me? I can only imagine if I'd been old enough, I would have worn that same look, Matt.
Yeah.
But I got a chance to meet her and talk to her, and she's now a freshman in high school in America. And I asked her, what are your plans? She goes, well, I want to be a lawyer, right? I want to be a humanitarian international rights lawyer. And that's what I want to grow up and do. And I guess I think about her life and her opportunities, Matt, here in America, and compared to what she would have had available to her had she stayed in Afghanistan, particularly because who knows what would have happened to her parents. And I'm looking at myself, right? I'm looking at myself, 40 years ago, right? And some incredible parallels, deeply gratifying, so many stories like this, Matt, that I encourage people to find and seek out and listen to.
You're involved with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation. I know, this is a big year for anniversaries related to that conflict. How are you seeing your role in that, and how are you keeping those stories alive for the next generation?
So I am involved with a number of nonprofits, No One Left Behind, which is continuing to help our Afghan allies relocate and resettle. I'm on the board of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which is keeping alive the wall, but more importantly, the significance of the wall, and helping educate another generation of Americans of what it means to serve and to sacrifice. I do truly believe that a life of service is the right kind of life, and that the reward for a lifetime of service is a lifetime of service. I also believe that one of America's superpowers, maybe our most important superpower, is our ability to inspire people to serve. And that doesn't just include people who are born here and raised here and had all the benefits. It includes people like myself, who from all around the world, who come to America. And it doesn't take 2 or 3 or 4 generations before immigrants start giving back. It starts with that person, right? And we have this amazing ability to take people from anywhere else and make them Americans, right? And to have them love America. And so I'm dedicated towards those 2 ideas, right? Towards inspiring service and continue and making sure that those opportunities exist for future generations of Americans and would-be Americans.
On a typical day, say a quiet day, if you were walking with someone personally that had never been to the wall before, is there a name, is there an individual that has drawn you that you draw other people to?
Maya Lin was inspired in her design. I still remember seeing it for the first time. I went on a Washington, D.C. field trip in 8th grade. It was my first time being at the wall. It was the place where I decided that I wanted to make a difference and I wanted to repay this debt. And I still remember quietly walking down into the wall, right? And you descend into the earth. And not only are you overwhelmed by the sheer number of names, the tens of thousands of names, but then you realize at first what you see is the names, right?
Mhm.
And it's overwhelming. But then your eyes defocus a little bit and you see yourself.
Mm.
And it's your reflection in the names, which I think many people subconsciously kind of hits them, but it may also consciously realize that, what we're seeing is a reflection of ourselves, right? Of our country, of our values. And in their service and sacrifice, we're seeing us. And so I encourage people to go out on the wall. There's not one meaning of the wall, right? It brings whatever meaning you bring to it, and it reflects whatever you bring to it, literally, right? And figuratively. So I think that's the power of the wall. And I encourage people to go down there and just have some quiet moments of reflection. And I visited different points in my life, and I've had different things I've taken away from that journey.
In your own family, how does your family look at what you're doing today with the Vietnam Wall?
All of us who are immigrants have different ways of celebrating and experiencing this week is very meaningful because of the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. There are many gatherings in place to remember and commemorate, particularly because for at least 130,000 Vietnamese, it also represents the same time they left the shackles of a war-torn country and started a journey that eventually led to the shores of the U.S. So, my family is remembering, thinking about 50 years is a long time and a blink in the eye all at the same time.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how, in in your trend line of huge, impressive wins throughout your life, you're also leading a company on the leading edge of artificial intelligence. Tell me why AI and why it's important to you.
So every time we have new technology, we have to figure out a relationship with it. And that goes all the way back to, if you think about it, like the car changed the way we transport things. Oil changed the way we heat and light homes, right? Electricity changed the modern economy. The assembly line changed the way we manufacture. The internet changed the way we connect with information. Social media changed the way we connect with each other. And sometimes we get those relationships right, and sometimes we get them wrong. I'm very concerned about getting the relationship with AI right, and in particular, readying people for this AI-enabled world. And AI is intellectual automation at scale. It allows us to do things that we didn't know were possible. It also allows us to do things that we do really well, faster, better, more efficiently. It's still early days, Matt, but I'm very concerned about readying people for this AI journey. And so BoodleBox is a platform around this idea of lifelong learning and work with AI. And we're starting off where tomorrow's workers are today, which is the college classroom, because that's where 18 million students are learning how to use AI responsibly. And we want to help them do that.
I think it's absolutely essential. At our own little company at Memory Anchor, we're very careful to apply AI where it makes sense and where it's giving real value to people and really breaking down barriers of understanding. So completely support you in your mission. And it's really inspiring what you're doing for America's next generation. Franz, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. If folks want to keep in touch with what you're working on, what's the best way to follow you and support all of your work across so many dimensions?
Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only France, like the country, and then middle initial Q. If you type France Q in, I'll come up, and I welcome people reaching out and messages and connections.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time today. Great to chat, and all the best. Okay. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Reach Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Reach Across Radio Network. Thank you for tuning in.